Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. And we're here to talk about chapters 19 and 20 of the Crippled God. That's the beginning of Book 6 to One in Chains. So, no, it's not the beginning, it's the ending of that. I'm an idiot. To the ending of chapters of Book 6. So let's do this. Cheers. So, yes, there's two things happening, and we're going to go into the structure on the one hand, and we're going to go into both of those for a little while at least as well. And first of all, let's look at the structure, because chapter 19 is mostly in Carcanas, with a lot of Carcanas stuff happening. And chapter 20 is once again with the Bone Hunters. And I think this is important in a way, because chapter 17, the beginning of book 6, also dealt with the Bone Hunters before we went to all this other stuff going on in Calance and so forth in chapter 18. So we end this book more or less where we started it off, that is with the Bone Hunters. Now obviously there's a lot of dramatic events going on in that last chapter, but I guess we'll first look at events in Carcanas, which are highly dramatic as well. I mean, we've reached the point of the story where we're getting close to the epic landing, like the epic ending of the entire 10-book series. So obviously stakes are rather high and dramatic shit is going down all the time. Just like the rain around me, apparently. I hope it won't get any worse, because then I don't know what to do. Anyway, let's go back. So, events in Carcanas, we see the actual breakthrough of the Tist Leosan and the death of Yedan Derek, which is as epic and everything as you can imagine. Things go down really brutally, while at the last moment the Tist Andy show up, and there's a lot going on. But I want to look first at something before that, and that's the events in Kurald Leosan, if that's actually what's on the other side. I guess it is Thirlan, or whatever kind of word that is. But I want to look at that, which is the way they the Tist Leosan first sent in their human, or at least not full Leosan population into that maw, into that hole, and destroyed them, and then put the legions in there. And what we realize there is that you have a fairly strict structure in Leosan's society, which mimics very much the one that we see in Forkor Asel case, where you have the the pure ones, and then you have the high watered, lesser watered, and then you have the shriven and so forth. It's a strict hierarchical society whose hierarchy is founded on blood, or in this case, you can also call it genetics, or whatever you want to call it, which I personally object to a lot. But I feel that's an important aspect to look at here, because it also shows us something that we've spoken about in other parts, or not spoken that much about, but that is mentioned in some other situations as well, where you have that idea that in a lot of cases wars are organized and run by those in power who more or less, regardless of any kind of morals, are willing to spend and use up, and those two words already tell you what I want to go for. That is, that regard people that are of a lesser class, caste, or whatever, regard them as actually more like as objects. They objectify them. They are, they can be spent, they can be used, and so forth. And that is something that We also see when it comes to military commanders, there's been a few situations where they're talking about the idea that like you have military commanders that stand in the back and just like nobles, rulers that decide now it's time for war, so they spend their people and so forth. And that's something that has a lot of problems with it. Now, when you look at the Malazan Empire, for for example, when you look at those, you see people not like the emperor, the empress. Well, the empress not so much in the Malazan Book of the Fall. That's more something that I guess you can see in other parts, like at least the emperor and Cortilian. When you look at those people, Decim Ultor definitely, while they were in charge and running the empire, they are certainly willing to risk their own lives a lot. And when you look on the other side at people like, when you look at the Bone Hunters, Agent Tevere is also walking in front of the army all the time, which shows that they don't, see themselves as fundamentally different from the rest of the people. Obviously, Shadowthrone sees himself as fundamentally different from the rest of the universe, but that's a different thing. And also you see that on the other hand, on the other side with the Sheikh and Lethery protecting the wall, right? Not the wall, protecting Lightfall, the shore. There, Ian Tovis and Yedan Derek fight in the front row, as do Pithy and Brevity before Pithy, I think it is, dies. So that I see as an interesting aspect there, because it can lead to maybe to a certain kind of loyalty. It certainly feels more like egalitarian, even though it is not necessarily. But it also shows, I guess, that it's easier in that more like Leosa and Forkor Asael way, for the ones in power that see everyone around them as disposable assets that can be used. For them to lose touch with morality, obviously, but also with reality in a way. You see that in Khadgar Fent, how he, for example, doesn't understand why Aparal Forge goes through that thing as the first one, because he just knows that he can. He's actually looking for an end, but also he tries to take down Yedan Derek, and he's successful in that. Yes, he dies himself, but I guess that's the thing. We see that all the way to the end, before Khadgar dies, he still doesn't understand why Aparal Forge did actually go in there himself and do this and sacrifice himself. Because you remember, earlier on, he was like, let everyone draw back and let Ipath Erul go through first, well knowing that that will most likely just kill Ipath Erul. So yeah, the idea of being rooted to a common fate in a way is something that I feel is important. And it's once again something that you look at when you look at our world, not only at politicians who certainly have that, but also when you look at the way our economy works, right? The way big corporations work. Those people in charge, at the top of those, they are. When you look at how corporations work, this is obviously why cyberpunk was so powerful when it kind of started. The idea that multinational corporations are almost run like medieval fiefdoms in a way. They are not exactly run on a democratic basis at all. It's basically feudalism, capital feudalism, sort of, in a way. And you look at these people; they are so far removed from everything else. They don't realize how the world works, because they get everything. You have that scene with Aparal Forge, and it's like, you may come through as the last person, Khadgar Fent, so who will actually be there to actually do all the stuff, grow the food, sweep the floors, and all that stuff, because you've all spent all of those people before. So yeah, there's that that I found interesting to look at. Another thing that I found very fascinating is the march of the Tist Andy through the forest towards the shore, the first shore. There's two things in there that are interesting. Um, I have to keep drinking because if it rains too much in there in the beer, it will be watered down. And I like my beer like I like my Folklore Essaying, that is pure, not watered. Um, anyway, my point is that on the one hand, the march of them with Spinok Durav, the hammering the swords against the shields and marching and everything. And the forest they march through being mostly with needles and rain and water coming down. It feels extremely northern. It's something that I just found surprising, because normally you have the Tist Andy being aloof and not showing any kind of emotion or whatever, and then they're marching through, they're hammering their swords on their shields, and through that dark forest and rain and mist pouring down. This feels more like a Viking story than anything else, and that's not exactly something I associated them with before. Right, which is interesting because obviously I read that before, 2 times before that chapter. But I just found it struck me this time around that it really gives a very distinct feel to both the Tist Andy in general and the idea of Carcanas in a way, which comes closer to how the Tist Edur feel in Midnight Tides in a way. The other part there is the idea of causes in the speech that Spinot gives when he talks about the fact that for so long the Tist Andy following Anomander Rake were taking up other people's causes, and that taking up all these other people's causes was actually for themselves to be able to now fight for their own place. Now they come here, they have someone else fighting for them, which is humans fighting for them. So there's that aspect, and this is an interesting thing because when you look at previous parts, when you look at something like Dust of Dreams, it's actually in Toll the Hounds, when we talked about the idea that Tist Andy are not actually interested in transactions. When they do something, they do it because they decide to do it, because they decided it's right to do it. When Anomander Rake decided to take up the cause of the people in Pale, or even before on the Rivi and so forth, when fighting the Malazans. And now we realize that there was an ulterior motive to that. There was a kind of selfish motive in there, and that motive obviously was to keep the Tist Andy as a people spiritually alive enough to at some point actually return to Carcanas and do what needs doing. So yeah, there's that, and I found that very powerful. And now we need to talk about Corlat and Sanderlath and Nimander and all of that, for a specific reason. And the point here is that the idea of staying a child, the idea of being or returning to that safety, when we've spoken about that before, that being a hostage means you never fully grow up because everything is done for you, around you, and so forth. And we see her descending back into, regressing into that state, and losing more and more the any kind of contact with reality, seeing all these ghosts around her and so forth, which is super tragic. And that's I guess the interesting thing here is that her idea of just burning everything down is a rather childish one. The notion of burning, unfortunately she is a child sitting on a throne that can control dragons. But the point is that the idea of if I can't have it, no one can, or if it's causing great, well, let's just destroy. The idea of total destruction, I feel, is one that most grown-up people really don't have that much anymore. but it comes very natural to children. As kids, we destroy, like, we build, I don't know, castles, sand castles on a beach, or we build something with kind of, I don't know, Legos or other building blocks or toy, whatever. To throw a tantrum or in fear or whatever, to just like tear the entire thing down, is a very childlike notion that most of us as adults struggle with and only manage in extreme situations, I guess. So yeah, her being able to run back to that room where she is safe, the hostage room, be a hostage once more, I felt is rather tragic. Like, I personally struggle with that part of the story so much because it's difficult to read and watch that. Yeah, that's the point. It's just extremely difficult to read and watch all of that. But now, let's look at the parts where it really, really hurts. The last child of the Kundril burnt tears. And there's like several things going on in there that are like, that part is one of the most powerful, emotionally powerful scenes in the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen for me. The point when Badal is watching, like, from the outside, and we see, like, it's sort of in a flashback, the point that over the day the Kundril children or youth all came to Sadik and gave him their toys, not expecting anything, just doing it because it felt right. And this, once again, is one of those things that I feel we as kids do so much more, like pure kindness, not expecting anything in return, not even, just doing it because it is the right thing to do, or whatever. It is something that is very, very childlike. And the Kundril kids doing that, children doing that, is in a way also like a chance for them to stay children and not succumb to all the, like, harshness of being on that track through the desert and almost dying. So that whole thing, just like the idea of them trying to rediscover what playing with toys is the day before, is just like brutal. Then obviously the sort of redemption of Gaul. I mean, it's still not a full redemption, but her like Jastara, whatever, however to pronounce her, his son's wife and maybe now lover, not so clearly, I don't know, forcing Gaul to go to Hanavat to be there at her at the birth of the child, and him finally actually doing it and going there, and then actually through all of that maybe finding the strength to actually be the war leader at least one last final time to recapture his dignity is powerful. But the most powerful part is obviously the end when Rut shows up, and when Rut shows up and they give the child to Rut to hold. Yeah. I'm not lying. I cried when I read that whole bit again today. It's so powerful. Yeah. There's all of that. Now, obviously, we also have the ballistic plot to talk about, and I feel once again, even up to this point, while Ballistic is an absolute arsehole, it only comes through in that conversation where he says that he was holding it back for officers because they have privileges, and the idea of privilege in such a situation is one that is like, the idea of privilege in general is obviously abhorrent. I'm not talking about current discussions of like innate privileges we as people of specific backgrounds do have. I'm talking about the idea of of a privilege that we are conscious of or that we demand for ourselves because of things that we have either done or not even done. The privileges that noble-born have because they have more responsibilities. They fucking don't have more responsibilities. That's the point. They just think so. And that is kind of really explained really well in that conversation when it comes out that like no one in that officer corps actually has the privilege of nobility except for the adjunct. And and then Ballistic having to shift to privileges that are required by rank, by all of these things, and it kind of shows how empty the idea of privileges is. Now, the fact that we have them in the real world is something else, but the idea of demanding privileges is just fucking ridiculous, because in the end we're all human, we're all the same kind of people, and I guess that is shown relatively well here. But apart from that fucked up notion of privilege, Ballistic is still understandable, right? That's the point. He is still someone I can empathize with. He's just like completely in over his head. He should never have gone on that trip, but as we also know, he didn't have any choice in there. Now we can look at whether Adjunct Tavaray is to blame for Ballistic, or whether it's circumstances. And she didn't have any choice but to take him with her, which is kind of true. And I guess that's one thing that we should maybe keep in mind when we read the entire book. Now, while we'll look at someone like Adjunct Tavaray and we praise her and praise her, or for her bravery and her virtues and all of that stuff, her empathy and compassion, we have to accept that even that comes as a price, at a price for other people. And now she may obviously feel compassionate for all these people. She may be conscious of the price. Well, that doesn't mean that there isn't a price for others to pay, and Ballistic is one of these people who pay that price. And they pay that price in their personal way, that they deal with conflicts in general, or deal with problems in general. So, yeah. Even though he's a dickhead, I still feel bad for Ballistic, even at this point. The other thing, obviously, I guess we should talk about the idea with the water, which does come across, like, if you don't think about it too much, as something of a deus ex machina, which, technically it is, because he uses the weapon of an elder god, so it is sort of a deus ex machina in the purest sense of the word. But in the way a lot of us use it nowadays, where it's like, we just have it happen because it has been it has been there all the time. The question that we should talk about is, why did you wait so long to use it? Couldn't she have saved more lives before by using the knife a day or two earlier? Would that also have worked? That, I feel, is the interesting question there. Was it necessary to actually walk to the absolute, utter, end of everything before doing this? Or not? And what kind of calculus does that actually take to say, I can sacrifice these people, and these people, and these people, and so forth? Because that's sort of what goes on there. And now we can look at the fact that, maybe Tavaray is kind of holding everyone to the same standard as she's holding herself. And that is another question that needs thinking about. Is can we do that? Can we expect from the universe the same things we expect from ourselves? Is that a wise course of action, or is that rather naive? Because we can change what we expect from ourselves. We can change our own actions to fit our expectations and so forth. We can strive to fit our own expectations, to match our own expectations, but we can't make the universe strive. The universe is, as we learned yesterday again with Hood, the universe is just chance and mischance, and there's no driving force, no intelligence behind it that structures it. It's just random shit happening. And so, yeah, holding other people to a standard is obviously important, but holding them to an extremely high standard can lead to people breaking with all the dire consequences for themselves and others around them. And that's once again what happens with Blizzdig there. Anyway, what else was there? Though I feel I missed something vital, but I can't recall it anymore. So I guess I'll just hope I remember it for the next time. And I'll leave you into a beautiful weekend. I hope so for you. I'll be back with the final book of The Crippled God on Monday and other stuff over the weekend. So until then, cheers.